Well, what an episode this was. With it being titled Never Propose in Public, it feels like Cousin Dashiell should have definitely lived by that. With this episode quite literally focusing on every character arc in the show, but climaxing with what looked like the resolution of George Russell versus the union and the workers of his mills, let's jump into this episode and break down all that there was to take away from it. So let's get into it. Here is the Gilded Age Season 2 Episode 6, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. George Russell and the workers. This episode climaxed with it seeming like George Russell and the troops were about to open fire on the workers who took themselves on strike because they were fighting for 888. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of rest. The real turning point in this battle was George Russell going to the leader of the strike's home and witnessing the difference in lifestyle and the lack of opportunity that was present for them. I feel before this he kind of viewed his workers as just numbers, people, but people that just worked for him. Whereas when he laid eyes on the worker's family and the fact that this worker had his own life that he was leading whilst trying to support his family that was struggling, it made him seem like an actual human being that had a life, and it ultimately made George Russell sympathize with him. We also saw that the worker's son was also working inside of George's mills, because that was the only thing that many of them could amount to. The image of the poor conditions that the people in the town were living in and the injuries that some of them had, which were most likely caused by the poor safety conditions in the mills, showed that things did need to be changed. And I think by George visiting the home and also the town, it opened up his eyes and made him want to call off the violence. George never wanted violence to ensue, but by witnessing all of that, it made him even more reluctant to. The calling off of the shots showed a weakness in George in the eyes of the workers, and they then had the realization that there was no way that George was going to be able to get them to stand down. They were prepared to die for conditions to improve, and even though nobody did, that was enough to get George to change his mind and realize that he himself needed to change things. So moving forward, one would imagine that they'll look to come to some kind of deal in order to get the workers back in the mill on better pay, so that work can resume. Marian and Cousin Dashiell's proposal. Wasn't this moment just a bit awkward? It's felt like for a while now that Dashiell was going to propose to Marian, and we all knew that she didn't really want to be with him. It all ties back to where Ada said to Marian that when you meet somebody that you truly love, you'll know that you want to marry them. And this is something that Marian most certainly doesn't feel about Dashiell. The fact that she basically looked at Frances and didn't want to upset her before answering. The fact that she was looking to Ada for confirmation that she'd done the right thing. And also the fact that when Larry Russell said to her that she should be celebrating, she said, about what? It shows that she most definitely doesn't want to get married to Dashiell, even though Agnes is over the moon, as she would be. There was a line in a conversation between both Marian and Dashiell where Marian mentioned how she couldn't attend the garden party because she was teaching people the basics in order to navigate their way into finding a job. And Dashiell basically responded with, "It's not like you're a real teacher," something which undermined the importance of what Marian felt like she was doing. So it shows that he already doesn't support what she does 100%, and that by being married to him, it could alter what she does anyway. I think we're going to be seeing the engagement fall through and they won't end up getting married. There was actually a really important shot during the proposal scene. Did you see it? When the engagement happened, the camera cut to Larry Russell at the end so that we'd be able to see his reaction. Marian and Larry have a really good connection, and I personally feel like we're going to be seeing them getting together at some point in the show. Maybe not in this season, but it feels like it's definitely going to happen eventually. Ada and Reverend Forte. Now this was a truly heartbreaking moment in the episode, and it was one that did evoke strong emotion when watching, especially when Ada cried into her sister's arms. The start of the episode was all focused on how happy Ada was in her new marriage with Reverend Forte, and that they were looking forward to spending their life together. However, tragedy struck towards the end of the episode. Throughout the entirety of it, we saw that Reverend Forte had a bad back, and it was something which was troubling him. After seeing the doctor, he was referred for some extra checks, and it was here where it was revealed that he had cancer, and that his condition was most likely going to get worse. This was such a sad story to watch unfold in this episode, because we finally got to see Ada being happy and in love. But now, it's most likely going to get cut short due to Reverend Forte being ill. Jack and the clock. This is something which has been in the works for the entirety of the season, and this is Jack working on the clock that he'd been trying to repair. And he finally did it. This whole story is something that's tying back to what he said at the start of the season, where he said how he imagined bigger things for his life, and that he didn't always want to be doing what he was doing for Miss Van Ryn forever. With Jack mending the clock, we saw that the group encouraged him to patent his invention that he created in order to mend it. Upon him doing so, he had to wait for a letter to see if it could be granted. However, we saw that it wasn't granted due to the fact that he didn't come from a certain background. He didn't have a set of qualifications, and he wasn't part of a community that specialized in that industry. This was something which broke his heart and made him feel inferior to others around him, highlighting the lack of opportunity for somebody which didn't come from a privileged background. I do, however, think that there is going to be some kind of happy ending with regards to Jack's story. We saw that Bannister had some kind of connection to somebody that may be able to help Jack with the red tape that's involved with the patent application and the situation that he's in, so I feel that will help him take it to the next level. What this arm of the story is showing us is not only the hunger for people to want to better themselves, but also the camaraderie that's present amongst all of the workers that are together. Each of them were chipping in to help Jack pay for the application, and now even Bannister's looking to take it a step further. It's an arm to the story that's definitely inspiring to watch unfold. Bertha vs The Academy. Bertha didn't have that large of a role in this episode, but what we did see was that she managed to secure the Duke at the opening night of the Met, something which the Academy didn't have at all, yet they were extremely jealous of it, and were actually set to be looking to pay the Duke double for what he was getting to attend the Met. Personally, I think the Duke is going to the Met to get closer to Gladys. There was a mention in this episode about suitors approaching Gladys and her turning her nose up. I think this was done because the Duke is going to be showing continued interest in her, and Bertha is going to be pushing for that to happen, so that it can improve the family status in society. We also saw that Mrs. Winterton and Mr. Winterton had decided to move over to the Met and had influenced many of their friends to do so as well. But in doing this, Mrs. Winterton wanted Bertha's central box on Tier 1, the best box in the house, to which Bertha reluctantly said that she could as a way of thanking her. However, we saw George Russell say that Mrs. Winterton will not have the box and that she'll not know until the evening of the opening night. This is something which I think is going to cause great embarrassment for the Wintertons, and it's only going to add more fuel to the fire of Mrs. Winterton's hatred for Bertha, and it will also make her want to seek revenge even more. Oscar's scheming. Okay, this is probably one of the more confusing arms of the story at the moment, but it seems like Oscar could be getting scammed. He's being made to believe that there's a close circle of investors that are looking to make a large pot of money in return, something that Miss Beaton is involved in too. Oscar made a return on the small investment that he made in last week's episode, and I think the return that he made was deliberately done to entice him further and make him want to invest even more following the money that was made. However, now, with him investing a large amount of money, I think the scam is actually going to kick in, and he's going to end up losing it all. We saw that he was acting confident in the garden with Miss Beaton, and I think that's most likely because in his mind, he's made a ton of money. But I feel, in reality, his world is about to come crumbling down when he realizes that he's lost it all. Peggy's continued work from the South. With Peggy returning from the South, we saw that she and Mr. Fortune made it back unharmed. However, the issues that they witnessed in the South is something which it looks like is going to be kind of present in the North. The schools that black people attended were at threat of being closed down, and the teachers were being deemed to be worse than the white teachers. This was something which Peggy and Mr. Fortune looked set to campaign against by not only writing an article and getting the community aware of it, but also by going out to the community and getting them to back their campaign that's against it. This is something which we're most likely going to be seeing taking center stage in the final couple of episodes of the season. I also feel like we're going to see Peggy and Mr. Fortune's relationship starting to blossom. Even though he's married, I feel we're going to see them throwing caution to the wind and admitting their true feelings for one another. Overall review. I thought this was a really good episode of the show. I feel like it was quite focused on a lack of opportunity and the class difference for the time. For example, we saw George Russell visiting the workers' home, John being denied opportunity because of his background, Agnes talking about how people would still be poor the next day, George's companion saying that he didn't know or care if there were schools for those people, and Marian's teaching of the poor being judged. And I thought it got that message and difference across well. I was glad to see a human side to George Russell in this episode, as I felt like it was always going to come. All of the stories have now quite literally opened up as we're set to hit the final stretch of the season. We still don't know if the show's going to be getting renewed, but I think judging by the interest that it's generating and the talking points, there's no reason as to why it wouldn't. So, there you have it, The Gilded Age Season 2 Episode 6, Ending Explained.